Hey, Joe Walsh here. The Civil War is already upon us, guys. It's been upon us for a while. We'll talk about it when Freedom returns at 5.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. I'm not sure the Civil War is upon us quite yet, but getting a little tense, and we're having putative, substantive discussions around questions like, should Sarah Sanders be allowed to exist in civil society without harassment? I'm not kidding. This was the deep thinkers on Morning Joe that batted this one around, including, of course, because she's a journalist, objective NBC journalist Elise Jordan.
Yeah.
I'm
not very familiar with her work.
She tried to answer the question whether Sarah Sanders belongs in civil society, and she's leaning against it.
And even that Sarah Sanders had over the weekend, which is a absolutely legitimate problem, but who cares?
But it goes back to the anger over plenty of Americans know that they are being lied to constantly, and they want the truth. And should someone who lies constantly and enables the president's lies be openly welcomed in society wherever they please? Should they face any kind of social or societal pressure? I'm increasingly weighing towards yes, even though I'm all about civility.
Sure,
but I do think
course.
that there are choices, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders has made her choices, and she has decided to constantly give false information from that podium to the American taxpayers who are paying her salary. Donald Trump has chosen to do that. Facts matter. The context that we present the facts matter. And this is not going away because we have thousands of children who've been separated from their parents, and we don't even know the full magnitude of it.
Council on Foreign Relations President Richard Haass was part of that panel, and he provided what constitutes pushback on that program, saying this about the trajectory of the country per the Sanders incident.
What happened the other day violates the spirit of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And what it doesn't mean we shouldn't be focusing on other things which are inherently more important. I hear you. But it just seems to me, one, besides that, it's politically counterproductive.
Totally.
I think your point's the big point. This is a descent of America into tribalism. And this is dangerous. One of the things we should have learned the last year and a half is we can't take things for granted in this country.
Right.
We should not take for granted the fact that this has essentially been a peaceful democracy, and our differences have never gotten bigger than what we could handle in a peaceful way. This is the sort of thing that makes me uneasy about some of the trajectory of this country.
Yeah, I mean, things have never gotten bigger that we couldn't handle them in a peaceful way. I mean, except for the Civil War. But for more on this topic and to answer the question, should we clean out the family detention centers and put all the political flacks who lie for their bosses into them?
Right.
Internment camps for lying political flacks to increase the civility and ostensibly the peace, per Maxine Waters. We're pleased to be joined by David French, writer at National Review, constitutional lawyer, author, veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. David, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So what about that? Should Sarah Sanders be the first sent off to the gulag for not telling the public the whole truth?
You know, I had this bizarro world experience yesterday when I was debating somebody on NPR about this very issue. And the point I made was, look, you can march, you can vote, you can sue, you can tweet, you can Facebook, you can raise money or send money to the people that are doing all of those things. But, you know, when you cross the line into personal, and now the story is that it wasn't so polite that Sanders was asked to leave, and apparently, according to her dad anyway, the owner then chased her across the street and started berating the people, berating the folks she was with at the next restaurant they attended. But when you cross the line and you're doing like what happened to Sarah Sanders, apparently now not just being asked to leave, but getting heckled, Kirsten Nielsen getting heckled directly, personally, and even outside her home. Pam Bondi, 3 large men get inches from her face and start screaming at her. She's the Attorney General of Florida. I said, when you're crossing that line, you're doing 2 things. One, you're creating a dangerous situation because I'm sorry, when people get up in your personal space and they're furious and they're angry, that creates danger. That's tense. It creates danger. And then the other thing you're doing as you're creating these dangerous situations, which could spiral into violence, is you're creating a dangerous situation for the state of our country, for the polarization of our country. And when I was saying this, the very next thing that people kept saying, callers and others, well, they need to be opposed. They need to be opposed. And I said, well, did you not hear what I said?
Right.
You can march, you can vote, you can petition, you can sue. But when it starts to get this up close and personal, and this vicious up close and personal, that's dangerous. It's just flat out dangerous.
Well, calling for harassment, for Trump's cabinet members and people that surround themselves with President Trump, that's not American, and that's not who we are. But the left seems to claim that President Trump started this wave of uncivility.
Well, look, if they're going to say that Trump started it, that's just completely ignoring recent history. I mean, it wasn't Trump that started the way. And if they're even pinning it on, well, we're being aggressive to oppose Trump. Well, what about Charles Murray at Middlebury when he was physically attacked for trying to deliver a lecture about class divisions in the United States of America, or Heather McDonald, who faced physical violence trying to block people from hearing her speech at Claremont College in California, or Ben Shapiro facing physical violence in Los Angeles when he was trying to deliver a lecture in California. I mean, you can go down the line that this trend towards very personal, very vicious, very aggressive tactics did not start with Trump. And look, I'm no apologist for Trump on this point. I mean, especially in his rallies when he was a candidate, it was vicious, and some of his people and how they embraced the alt-right, like Steve Bannon, was inexcusable. So I'm no apologist for Trump here, but I'm sorry, the left doesn't get the excuse of saying, well, we were awesome until Trump came along and now it's special. No,
Yeah.
This is a problem that predated Donald Trump.
Well, your colleague in National Review, Kyle Smith, I thought had a good piece. It sort of is of a kind that Andrew Sullivan wrote a couple of months ago, I think, in the New Yorker about we all live on a college campus now. And that's the argument that Kyle Smith makes. He writes that when absolutely everything is political, it makes sense to harass your opponents while they eat. One of the most exhilarating aspects of youth is that everything matters so deeply. One of the rewards of adulthood is leaving campus urgency behind. So do we have sort of an arrested development problem in the American culture?
Yes. I mean, I think that that's absolutely the case. And I remember 20 years ago speaking, because I was working on trying to defend religious liberty and free speech in college campuses, and saying, this is a problem, this is a problem. And the answer I would constantly get back was, well, when these kids go into the real world, everything will be okay. And what if they change the real world? What if they leave college and change the real world? And so now what we see is entire industries are run essentially like they're, the Harvard faculty lounge. I mean, try being a conservative openly at Google in certain circumstances. Look at the ideological landscape in Silicon Valley. Look at the ideological landscape in much of the media. Look at the ideological landscape in Hollywood. The customs and manners and mores and habits of the campus activists have transferred fully into corporate America now. And of course, they're all over the place online. It's even worse online. And so, yeah, I think Kyle's piece was most definitely on point.
I wanted to, get your reaction to this. Norm Ornstein. All right, so this is not Maxine Waters. But here's one of the things I think Trump has provided in terms of maybe an unintended benefit, and I don't think this is the only one, but he has shown to me that there is not as much daylight between an AEI scholar, quote unquote, like Norm Ornstein, and someone like Maxine Waters. And I submit for evidence this reaction that Ornstein had to the Supreme Court's decision yesterday in a couple of gerrymandering cases in Texas and North Carolina. He said, I choose my words carefully. Alito, Roberts, Kennedy, Gorsuch, Thomas are the Bull Connors of jurisprudence. They are consciously bringing back Jim Crow. Clarence Thomas, who lived on the wrong side of Jim Crow, is bringing back Jim Crow because, as the Wall Street Journal editorial board opined on the decision by the court's opinion, the court's opinion reversed the opinion of the lower court, which was in effect the racial gerrymandering is constitutional as long as liberals are doing it. So apparently, the Wall Street Journal editorial board also comprised of a bunch of Jim Crow cheerleaders. And by the way, I saw Norm Ornstein speak. He spoke to a group of civilians that attended the U.S. Army War College when I was there in 2009, and he gushed over Obama, as George Will did initially. And he couldn't have been proven more wrong by history. But I mean, the exposure of these jilted intellectuals who have adopted the rhetoric of the unhinged left, I think provides a service.
Well, it is pretty stunning to see the level, to see the lack of proportion, the lack of perspective, the lack of historical knowledge. I mean, here we have Nancy Pelosi last week was calling after Donald Trump reversed his course on child separation. After that, she was calling the policy of family detention child abuse. Well, that happened to be the policy of the Obama administration. And it was the policy of the Obama administration until the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals made them stop in 2016. So this is something that Obama was doing right up until the end of his presidency. And there were reasons for it, because you don't have good options absent family detention as to what to do to secure the border in any way, shape, or form. But now, once again, we're in a position where rhetoric is outpacing reality at a stunning rate. And it is really feeding on itself now, because one of the things about social media is that the more extreme you get, the more followers you're going to get, the more likes, the more retweets. And when that happens, it constitutes its own reward. It elevates your voice, it elevates your prominence. And so we're beginning to reach a point where people in the U.S. with some of the largest followings are being incentivized to constantly get more hysterical. And one of the things about this notion that, we're so frustrated and defeated and the only option we have is to get into somebody's face is so absurd. I mean, the checks and balances of this country still exist. And in fact, the policies that they've hated the most from Trump, the first edition of the travel ban, the child separation policy, those policies have actually been changed substantially or reversed entirely through the normal workings of the political system. And so this idea that we're in some sort of special case scenario where all the normal instruments of democracy aren't working, so what we now have to do is initiate vicious personal confrontations, it's wrong. It's completely wrong. The normal mechanisms of democracy and American checks and balances still work. There is no need to resort to these potentially violent confrontations.
He is David French, writer over at National Review, nationalreview.com, constitutional lawyer, author, and veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. David, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer